Hello, hello. Okay, this is true. I had a subscriber email me and said, Doug, you should go through this video, and I didn't. I replied, who is Ear Biscuits? And then this morning, I went on Twitter, and what's his name? Josh McDowell's son, Sean, was mentioning this. And when apologists start talking about these sort of things, and I kind of like, okay, there's probably something to this. But I honestly, maybe I've seen Ear Biscuits before in passing years prior, but I don't remember ever watching a video of theirs. I have just watched a few minutes of this one, and I'm going to, it's an hour and 44 minutes long. I'm going to just go about an hour from the end and start there, and I'm going to play it at 1.3x, and so it'll be a little less than an hour. So this could be a long live stream, but we'll see. But I seriously have no idea who these people are. I'm assuming this guy's name is Link. I got an article written from that Sean McDowell posted, so I'm assuming that this is accurate information. And if someone's watched this already and has really, if there's an important time stamp, let me know. They have over 16 million subscribers just on their primary YouTube channel alone, not to mention the many tentacles of their podcast distribution and various other social media channels. Their influence is far-reaching. I'm reading from, what's his name? Got to give credit where credit is due. Matt Markin's February 17th, 2020 article. He's a Christian guy, this Matt guy, and he's upset that his own child now is doubting Christianity because of these guys. What's the worst that could happen, Matt? Their influence is far-reaching, and a big part of their brand has been this: we grew up as Christian kids just like you. Katie and I found ourselves wondering how many Christian young people, target audience ranging from 12 to 28. Oh, that's why I haven't heard of them. Their target audience is 12 to 28, and I'm 48. So, no, I'm 49. Oh, my goodness. How in the world did these guys, who are just like me, who I've come to love so well, just abandon their faith? Perhaps I should reconsider this as well. Out of curiosity, I took about 5 minutes to read through the comments. This is Matt speaking, the comments of this video, and was struck that well over 90% of the comments I read were affirming their decision to leave the Christian faith. Many commented on how they have shared the same struggles and were quite relieved to know they are not alone. This is so fascinating to me. This is just, I hate to say this, but it's showing the traditional conservative, at least, view of Christianity is becoming very irrelevant. So I'll press play and we'll see what they have to say.
You're having these conversations with Jessie, and you get into a little bit of it and she breaks down.
Every time. This.
Jessie, I'm assuming Jessie is his wife. Okay, remember, I just took an hour off from the back. So if that's true, then I totally can relate to that. My wife broke down every time I talked about me leaving Christianity.
This was traumatic for her. Every time I would bring it up. And of course, I would wait until it had become unbearable for me, and then I would bring it up to her. Because I'm trying to respect her, and so we're raising these kids, and I know how important this stuff is for her. And she was very educated in all this too, you know. We would argue about the young earth thing when we were dating in college, because that was her perspective, her background. And it was not easy for our marriage. And
yeah, because you don't want to bring it up early, because it's a tough thing it may pass. It's a tough thing to bring up. So it sounds like you start to bring it up when you, like you said, you can't.
When I got
bring it up, and then it's almost you've reached a conclusion about something, and then you're spilling your guts to her and expecting her to. She's late to the process, which is actually even more difficult.
Yeah. And you mentioned that thing about like the concern was with truth. And listen, I don't know where this comes from. This is my disposition. My dad was a lawyer and is a law professor. He's got a very specific way of kind of getting to the bottom of things. And I think, so it's kind of in my DNA to be concerned about truth. But I think ultimately.
Yeah, and my dad was a very free-thinking type guy. He would just not follow the status quo. My uncle was even more so. So I think when there's people in your life that you love, who have done things a certain way, you're more likely to do it a similar way. But I do find it interesting that his wife was a young earther, and I'm not sure if he was or not. Someone can tell me in the live stream chat. This is bad of me, I guess, but a part of me wants guys like Kent Hovind to just keep doing what they're doing. They're going to kill Christianity way faster than anything else. In fact, don't even push back. Actually, I apologize to Apologia if he's listening, because he's pushing back on him all the time. But these guys are going to kill themselves. I say that figuratively in their belief system. Because when their kids go to school, and if evolution makes sense to them, they're going to fall away very quickly.
It was like, again, back to what I said at the beginning, is the whole point is that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life.
Mrs. Apostate, thank you so much. He indeed was a young earther. I used to watch Good Mythical Morning maybe 10 years ago. Good Mythical Morning, that's another podcast they have?
This is the truth. You find the truth sets you free. Truth, truth, truth. The whole point of the Bible, while people defend the Bible and say that the Bible is inerrant, without error, it is from God. It's written by God through people. The whole point of all that is because it being true is paramount.
Yeah, if you are a young earther and if you take a literal interpretation of the Bible, you're more likely to leave very quickly when the cognitive dissonance hits. I think even Christian apologists agree with that.
Maybe more so than any other faith. The holy text being true is it's a linchpin, right? Now, okay.
For Catholics, it's traditions.
Okay.
And just one more thing. You had mentioned there were two camps when you were talking about about the Bible being literally what actually happened versus Adam and Eve being figurative. I don't know if you were coming back to that or not, but it seemed like, again, we're at a point where there's how you just described, that's a certain subset of Christian faith that believes those things about the Bible.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty fitting that at this point we moved to California. 2011, we moved to California. We immediately got involved in a church, an evangelical church, met some great people, made some great...
They moved to California. From where? Where are they from originally? But I can see where this is going. California is such a liberal state, those heathens.
Friends. And this is when I adopted what I'm going to call California Christianity. To get at what Link was getting at here a second ago. In LA, even within the evangelical church, I think there is this sort of, because you're in this incredibly diverse place with so many different perspectives, you really can't maintain a Christian faith in a place like this without at least some sort of realization that there's a lot of gray. It's not about having it all figured out. It's not about being completely certain. It's about a relationship with Jesus. And this was like a kind of a breath of fresh air for me, honestly, coming to California with all these doubts. I found these Christians who had these doubts, Christians who saw the Bible.
Okay, so he had doubts before he moved to California.
Differently, who were like, yeah, man, I don't know exactly what happened. Evolution seems like it probably did happen. And Adam and Eve might not have been real, but like, that's not my day-to-day with Jesus, man. And so I have a relationship with Jesus. I wrote in my journal, 2011, my faith is still weak, but it is not gone. And possibly God is revealing a foundation that he can build real faith upon. Here are a few things that have hit me recently. From an intellectual standpoint, I may never have certainty about my faith. That pursuit may be fruitless. It's becoming clearer that the significance of my faith, or the so-called proof of Christianity, is not found in a well-reasoned argument. Rather, it rings true the way a musical note would. It hits my resonant frequency.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. I think that's true. I think beliefs come first, reasons come second. And so when something resonates with someone in a real powerful way, they're more likely to believe it. It's not from syllogisms or deductive reasoning.
And that was very reassuring to me at the time when we moved to LA. I was like, man, in this kind of crazy world with people trying to be all about themselves, in this place that's all about making it an entertainment business, I've got my faith, I've got my relationship with Jesus, I've got my Christian community, and I don't have it all figured out, and it is gray, but it feels so true, and it proves itself out to be true in my daily life.
Feels so true. Yeah, every religion, I would say every adherent to religion, that's the case, but they all can't be correct.
I tried living like this. I ran into a few problems.
The music did not continue to resonate
in
your bosom?
basically the foundation of my faith ultimately was still the Bible, even if I had sort of a more liberal view or more gray view of what the Bible might mean and represent.
Can someone tell me in the live stream chat, what's the relationship between these two guys? Are they just friends? Are they cousins? Are they brothers? They don't look like brothers.
And so every time I read the Bible, I saw issues with it. Every time I heard a sermon, I would have an issue with it. My experience with Christianity was basically inflaming my doubts and my questions. So the closer I got to it, the more I couldn't quite shake these questions that continued to linger. And the place that I had sort of...
Yeah, and the typical Christian listening to this, there's answers to all these questions, Rhett. There's answers. You just need to explore them.
Put a barrier around and said, we're not going there. Sure, we can talk about evolution. We can talk about the historicity of the Old Testament. But where I'm not going to go is I'm not going to go to Jesus. I'm not going to question Jesus. But I just couldn't help myself. Because I was like, my understanding of who Jesus is not just based on my experience with him personally, but it's also based on what the Bible has to say about him. This is how we know what there is to know about Jesus. And again, when I looked into this, my world was rocked in a very big way. I'm not going to give sufficient detail here. Lots of people have gone and done this who are smarter and more educated than me. But basically, there are just as many views on this as there are people who study it. But essentially, I lived my whole life being sure that the Gospels were historically reliable, almost taking it for granted. I mean, I'd read Josh McDowell's evidence.
Yeah, this is so great. Apologists, are you listening? One way to keep your children in Christianity is to get rid of this idea of the certainty within the Holy Text. Because when there becomes a friction, that doesn't matter if you have an answer to a contradiction. That does not matter, apologists. Doesn't matter at all if you have answers to questions. What matters is if the person who's doubting believes it, if it resonates with them, if it computes in their mind, and if it doesn't, and they're coming from a viewpoint of this literal certainty that the Bible is, or the New Testament or the Gospels are reliable, and then that's shaked, they're out. They're done.
That demands a verdict, and Josh McDowell's new evidence that demands a verdict. I had read Lee Strobel's Case for Christ. I could spit these arguments back out to you on an airplane and make you think that, whoa, I should be a Christian.
Why on an airplane, by the way?
Because when you're an evangelical Christian and you sit next to a stranger, this may be the only opportunity you ever have to share the life-changing message of Jesus with them.
Yeah, exactly. And the plane might go down, and we all know what happens after death.
There were lots of conversations that involved airplane evangelism because it was just like his captive audience.
Yeah.
It's like, you're going to go this whole flight and not say anything?
Right. What if it crashes? Now,
He just said
but I took a second to go one layer deeper.
I think me and Rhett are sabbatical.
And to look at the answers to the Christian answers that I had been given all my life. And that was when I realized that this Jesus thing was very, very messy from a historical standpoint. There's a few books that do a good job of outlining some of this stuff. One of them is Jesus Interrupted by Bart Ehrman, who's a...
Wait a minute, Rhett. It sounds like he's saying that just because the Bible says something, maybe it's not just the way it is.
Professor of New Testament at UNC, who incidentally, Jesse was in his class, and she used to come home every single day, and then we would come up with ways to go back to argue against him, ironically. Me and you are actually involved in a Campus Crusade initiative.
I'm sure he's going to say this, but is his wife still a Christian?
On the campus of UNC to kind of combat what he was doing because he was having so much influence on the students. So I understood Bart Ehrman had been the enemy for so long, but what I started to realize is that he had a very similar story, and I thought that he dealt with the subject matter in an honest and even-handed way. There's also a book called The Historical Jesus, 5 Views, which kind of runs the spectrum, runs the gamut on how you can see this. But basically what I just saw is that there's so many people coming at this with an intention to uncover the truth, to find the truth, and they're coming to these wildly different conclusions. This isn't...
Yeah. Boy, man, this is the stuff I say. Your confidence should be lowered in something when you have people who are honestly, sincerely trying to discover truth. They're looking at the same thing and they're coming to different conclusions. That should be a red flag that maybe we should lower our confidence in the conclusion, that there's too much subjectivity involved to say, yes, we know what this is. Yes, we know what this means. Yes, we know what happened.
Like science. You know, somebody does a scientific experiment in 1985 in China, and then somebody does the same scientific experiment in 2019 in California. If everything is controlled, they're going to come to the same conclusion.
Does this guy watch PineCreek? This is what I've been saying for years.
That's not how history works. and it makes it very difficult to come to definitive conclusions about things. But essentially, in the end, by far, to me personally, the most compelling and seemingly reasonable view was that the Gospels appear to be a mix of religious propaganda as well as actual history.
I've said the same thing. But I can tell that Christians, especially apologists, are just going to scream bloody murder that you cannot say the Gospels are propaganda. But it really is. The Oxford Annotated Bible, page 1744, says something like that primarily the Gospels are not a historical analysis, that its main goal was to affirm the belief in the followers, that they don't represent historical eyewitness accounts because they're written 40, 50, 60 years after and so forth. This is a reputable biblical scholarship saying these things. This is not fringe.
So there's definitely some history in there. I think Jesus was a real person, so does Bart Ehrman. But I don't think that as he is presented there is completely reliable. That's what I was thinking at the time.
So what did you believe about Jesus? You reached a conclusion about the person of Jesus at that time when you were researching that.
I had a picture of Jesus that was the picture that I had always had of this person who did these miracles and died on the cross and rose again and died for my sins and was God in the flesh. All the things that were important to believe about him. But I had doubts about those things being true, but I didn't have another picture of Jesus. There was no other picture of Jesus.
So you read all these books?
Yeah, he had doubts that it was true. This is another misapprehension that I think a lot of Christians have when they hear about people leaving the faith, that, oh, they were just hurt in the church. Maybe he'll say he was hurt in the church, but it's that whole idea there's some emotional thing that happened. It sounds like to me that Rhett's saying, no, I just doubted that the core propositions were true.
So you did all this research about Jesus, but your conclusion was not really a conclusion at that point.
Oh yeah, I was still in process. And so this was incredibly unsettling, right? This was way more unsettling than anything that had happened so far, because this was Jesus. This was the core of everything. This is who my relationship was with, and all of a sudden I've got very serious doubts about him.
Isn't it interesting that he uses the word relationship and now he has doubts about that relationship? Like when with a human being, it's really hard to doubt that you have a relationship with a human being. It might be you might doubt what kind of relationship it is, but that you have a relationship. Isn't it interesting that you can doubt that you have a relationship with Jesus, which tells you there's something wrong with that definition of relationship.
I think that anyone that you would have conversations with, and you did initiate with not only Jesse, but with me and with other people that you confided in over this decade of going through this. If you were talking to someone who was still very much committed to their faith, it was like much more solid, I think the response, maybe it's not spoken, is, well, yeah, as long as you hold on to Jesus and you know, it's like that, you can't.
Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Just hang on to Jesus.
Let go of that. You can let go of everything else, but you can't really let go of what you believe about Jesus raising from the dead and paying the penalty for your sins instead of you.
Yeah. Paying the penalty of the sins. There's Christians fight about that all the time. He didn't pay a penalty. He overcame evil.
Yeah. It's either you go to hell or he does, which he already did and came back,
right,
is the belief. So you can let other stuff go and maybe not panic. And again, I'll share my perspective on interacting with you more next week, but at times that was part of it.
Yeah, because what you believe about Jesus is paramount, but what you believe about Jesus is still based on what is presented in the Bible. If not, where else are you getting it? I mean, some people might be like, well, I'm getting it directly from God. But that's not what Christianity teaches. It's coming from God and the Bible, and they don't contradict one another. So when it became clear to me that it wasn't something that I could have the same kind of faith in it that I've had, I had a meltdown. I didn't do anything crazy externally, but there was a lot happening internally. At this point, I said,
do you remember a time or a place associated with this?
Well, I've got a couple of another journal entry that I'll go into, which is sort of the next stage of this thing. But
man, I'm not a writer, but I kind of regret not journaling like Rhett did here.
Not particularly, but I do remember saying this at the time. I was like, God, you are bigger than all of this, right? I'm just this little human who sees through a glass darkly. I got this finite mind, and I'm trying to understand the infinite mind, the creator of the universe. It seems pretty arrogant, actually, you know? And I was like, Is God just sitting there watching me do all this research, and eventually he's gonna give me some satisfying answer, and then all of a sudden I'm gonna have faith? That doesn't seem like a relationship. That's not how you conduct a relationship. I don't make my wife fit a certain criteria.
This is exactly what I was just talking about. Is this really a relationship with Jesus?
I don't ask her a bunch of questions about her past in order for her to qualify to be, you know what I'm saying? It's like I experience relationship with her on a personal level. And
which you don't do with Jesus. I know that's really offensive to people who believe they have a relationship with Jesus, but you can't audibly hear Jesus. You can't visually see Jesus. You can't touch Jesus and feel Jesus. You can't say, hey, Jesus, can you pass along a message to so-and-so and have it reliably come back?
And I just felt like I was just completely in my mind, and I made this whole thing like scientific and intellectual. And also, it seemed like I was being arrogant because I was waiting for God to fit my expectations. I was creating God in my own image, as opposed to God creating me in his image. I had flipped the script on God and was waiting for him to like be my little trick pony that does all the things that I want him to do in order for me to believe in him. There's a verse that kind of gets into
Which
this.
was answers, basically.
Isaiah 55 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts."
So God's saying, I'm bigger than you.
Right.
There's certain things you just can't get, dude.
Yeah, and at this point I was like, okay, you know what? I think this is probably where faith comes in. You know, it makes sense to me that this might be where...
I wonder if he's going to give the real definition of faith or the fake definition of faith that all these atheists often talk about.
Faith comes in because I am sitting here trying to prove this stuff out, but shouldn't I just have faith first and then
What? Proof and faith are two separate things?
Maybe these answers will be given to me by God. Isn't this what faith is all about? I mean, the whole point is it's evidence of things not seen, right?
And so your next step was, there's no way for me to know, but I'm gonna try a different route, which is maybe faith needs to come first.
Yeah.
And then we'll open up, maybe that'll lead to something.
Yeah, I can believe in the Jesus that I believe in because that's what the Bible says. I can believe in the biblical Jesus, even though I have reasons that from a historical perspective to doubt that. I can still believe in it and overcome that. And this is when I ran into some problems. So,
yeah, I believe that runs into problem. Trying to believe something that doesn't have evidence is really tough, or doesn't have good evidence, I should say, or empirical evidence.
The first thing was, how does this differentiate me from any other faith on earth, right? One of the things that makes...
Yes, this is the outsider test for faith.
And this is when I ran into some problems. So the first thing was, how does this differentiate me from any other faith on earth, right? One of the things that makes Christianity unique is that, you know, it is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through the Son, right?
I tell you, it is extremely dangerous when ex-Christian, non-Christian knows the scriptures.
You don't get to the Son through somebody else. You don't get to the Son through Buddha, right? But also, evangelical Christians tend to be pretty critical of other faiths.
Understatement.
Mormonism is a perfect example, right? Mm-hmm. If you're in an evangelical church or certain evangelical churches, you know, they teach you that Mormons basically have it wrong, that Mormonism is a bastardization of Christianity.
Mormonism is a bastardization of Christianity, just like Christianity is a bastardization of Judaism.
Right? It's not just another Christian group. And lots of Christians will write books that explain how all the things that Mormons believe about Joseph Smith and these things that happen are not true, and here's why. And the Book of Mormon is not true, and here's why. So they can be very critical of that faith. But yet, if you say those things to a Mormon, they will say, well, I have a burning in the bosom that proves to me that...
Yeah, and some Christians say, I have the inner testimony of the Holy Spirit.
These things are right. So you can tell me that these things seem wrong and you can show me certain things, but I believe them to be true, and you can't change that because I have this sort of seal and sign from God, this indication that this faith is real and this is all true.
As Alvin Plantinga would say, the sensus divinitatis, it is evident that I sense in a real way that this God is real.
And I was like, isn't that what I'm doing right now? Now I'm just saying that I'm just going to have faith that things are real. Damn the evidence. So
faith and evidence are not two separate things, Rhett. At least that's what the apologists have told me, even though Jesus said, blessed are those who believe and haven't seen.
How does that make me any different, right? And ultimately, this kind of faith felt a little cowardly to me, to be honest. It felt like what I was saying is, yeah, there's some conclusions that I really don't want to come to, and the way I'm going to avoid those is just by having faith.
Yeah, I think if a Christian can really put themselves into the shoes of a different belief system and ask similar questions of themselves that they ask a belief system that they believe is false, it's a very, very powerful technique to seeing if what you believe is true or true for reliable reasons.
But ultimately, you just can't make yourself believe. You just can't make yourself have faith. This was a torturous place for me, right? And I was there for a very long time. There was lots of praying. There was lots of reading the Bible, which would inflame some of the same doubts. There was lots of talking to Christians openly about what was happening. I want to be very clear that I didn't go into a cave somewhere and come to these conclusions.
Yeah, see, that's a great point, because that's going to be one of the main criticisms of Rhett, is my guess, is that, he just didn't, there's answers out there, Rhett, you just didn't seek them out. You just didn't read so-and-so. And he's saying, no, I did fellowship with people and talk about these things.
Never run them by. I didn't want to leave this thing, man. This was my life. This defined everything for me. This was the foundation of my marriage. This was the foundation of the way I was raising my kids. I didn't want it to go away.
Yeah, I remember when I left Christianity, a friend of mine asked, well, do you have to redo your vows now, your marriage vows?
It was the orienting, purpose-driven worldview that was basically defined everything about me. But yet, I'm going through this process. I'm talking with people. I'm talking to my wife. She's crying.
You're talking to me.
Yeah, talking to you. I was talking to you the entire time about this stuff. You didn't cry. Thank you.
I didn't cry.
Yeah, I wonder how many hours my wife cried when I left Christianity. It is so weird, because I think a lot of Christians would say, you hurt your wife. You are a bad person because you hurt your wife. And I bet you Rhett gets this as well. Rhett, you're a bad person because you hurt your wife. Well, at the time. I don't know if she's still a Christian. Someone said she's left as well. But the thing is, you can't force yourself to believe something that you don't believe. Like, would it be fair if, let's say, my wife and I started out as atheists and then she became a Christian, I just started crying and crying? Would it be fair to call my wife a bad person for becoming a Christian and then being mad at me? I mean, causing me to cry for being a Christian? No.
But the major shift for me occurred when I asked a question I'd never asked. I've been very, very afraid to ask this question, and that was, what if I'm wrong? What if I opened myself up to the possibility that maybe I have been wrong about this? I want to be clear. I'd never done that. Even in all these things that had shaken me, right? All these doubts that I had, I still was there was this Christian core that was completely protected.
Yeah, that is such an amazing comment. I think there is a big percentage of Christians who haven't seriously, they've had doubts, just like Rhett says, but they haven't seriously really contemplated the real idea that they could be completely wrong. Not just a little bit wrong. That Christianity could be just false. What if? I really doubt a big percentage of Christians have really gone that far.
Through all this that I wasn't willing to let go of. But I was like, what if I am wrong? Can I just live like that for a little bit? I'm pretty good at kind of giving myself over to things, right? I can watch a movie and get lost in it. I can read a book, I can get lost in it. I can read a book from a different perspective and I can adopt that perspective for a little bit to see what it feels like. And I decided that I was going to do that. It's like, let's just consider what it would mean if you were wrong. What would that mean about the Bible? And when I was honest with myself.
Yeah, and the thing is, this is precisely what I think a lot of Christians want other religions to do. Please, Muslim, please consider that you could be wrong. Please, Mormon, consider that you could be wrong. I mean, what's the first step to seeing the truth of Jesus? It's to turn away from what you currently believe and follow Jesus. But if you're not doubting what you're currently following, how in the world are you going to turn away from it? The double standard is just amazing. Now, Christianity could be true. Hear me out. Christianity could be true. But still, you have to be willing to do this exercise that Rhett's talking about, to seriously consider that you could be wrong and have markers or ways to figure that out.
The Bible began to make a lot more sense to me personally as a product of humans rather than God. It seemed less and less like God's message to people and more like people's best guesses about God. And in that, it became a lot like any other holy text. And when I came to that conclusion, I wasn't fully there, I was just considering, what does it feel like to think this? It led to a few more questions.
What does it feel like to think this? That's a very interesting phrase.
That I'd always been afraid to ask myself. I'm going to read these because I wrote them down. These are just a few of the questions I'd always avoided. If I don't have to believe that God ordered his chosen people to slaughter men, women, and children by the thousands, then why would I?
That is so good. If I don't have to believe that God slaughtered women and children, then why should I? Why would I? Excellent question. Now, the answer that a lot of Christians would give is because if I doubt that, then what else do I have to doubt? If I say that this is just men writing stuff to justify their own actions, then do I say this is just men writing stuff in the Gospels to justify their beliefs? This is why a lot of Christians would say, answer this question in the affirmative, that they still have to believe this. But that's, if you can be a Christian and just reject big chunks of the Old Testament, do it. If you can still live with yourself and still keep Christianity intact, do it. Why wouldn't you? Because it's true, Doug. It's true.
If I don't want to believe that every religious experience of any person who is not a Christian is ultimately illegitimate, then why would I? If I don't have to believe that anyone who doesn't have a relationship with Jesus, i.e. the majority of people who have ever lived, are going to spend eternity being literally tortured in a fire, experiencing never-ending pain and suffering, then why, no pun intended, in the hell would I believe that?
Why in the world would you choose to believe such a thing? Good question. A lot of Christians. This is why I think in the United States, the belief in eternal conscious torment's going down. It's a death knell to Christianity if you believe that. I don't know, Braxton Hunter, I know you're going to hear this. I don't know. My guess is, how do you live with yourself? How do you choose? If you had a choice not to believe this, would you take it? Because you really don't like it, do you?
And if I can somehow accept the idea that hell exists because of God's holiness, why would I believe in a God who would choose to create that particular world where people have no choice whether or not they're going to be born? But then once they are born, if they don't adopt the correct understanding of God, he will punish them forever. Why believe in that God if I don't have to?
Why believe in that God if you don't have to? Great question. Because he can hurt you if you don't. If it's true. If it's true there's eternal conscious torment, and if it's true that if you don't believe it, you go there, there's your reason right there. And in my opinion, that's a pretty good reason. But still, what does that say about the God that wants to be worshipped if he's like that?
So where did this lead me?
Because the answer to those questions are that you have, there's a lot of fear of what you might lose or experience, but there are some things to gain.
Yeah. Yes, great point. What's this guy's name again? Sorry, Rhett and Link. Is that his real name, Link? Okay, listen to what he said here.
What you might lose. There's a lot of fear of what you might lose or.
Yes, and ding, ding, ding. This is why people stay Christian. I honestly think it's for pragmatic reasons. If I doubt this is true, if I doubt Christianity is true, what's at stake here? What am I going to lose? Well, I'm going to maybe lose my community. My family might disown me. I might be struck out of the will from my daddy. I might lose my hope. I might become suicidal. I might lose my morality. I might do things that are bad because I don't have this God watching over me and helping me. I might die because I don't have this God protecting me when I drive.
experience. But there are
Exactly.
some things to gain
Yeah.
if you go to the other side.
Well, it's funny because I had spent a lot of time in my head, a bunch of like intellectual processing of all these things, right? Philosophical stuff. But at this point, as I felt this sort of traditional faith slipping away, I started worrying about some pretty practical things. Like, how is my marriage going to stay together? What am I going to teach my kids? This is what I've been teaching them. What am I going to teach them now?
To be honest, I never really had fear about my marriage. And as far as teaching my kids, I didn't even fear that either. It's like, I wasn't also going to start teaching them to harm people.
What am I going to do? Where am I going to turn? What's going to replace this? This is this is community. This is purpose. This is meaning. Where am I going to find something like that? You know,
That's a good question. I'm the type of personality that I can do fairly well without a lot of community. But I think for most people, I think I'm an anomaly. I think most people need a lot of community. So when you leave Christianity and that community is cut off, what do you do?
And a verse came to mind, John chapter 6, after Jesus has kind of talked about him being the flesh, and he's kind of basically given the whole idea of, communion at this point. And it's a difficult teaching, and a lot of people walk away because they're like, he's talking about eating him and drinking his blood. This dude's nuts. And it was a difficult teaching. People didn't understand what he was getting at, and they walk away.
Mm-hmm.
So
you hear that, Catholics? That's a pretty nutso teaching, right? Communion, eating flesh, drinking blood. Just think about that if you're a Catholic, because Catholics kind of prop that up more so than Protestants.
Jesus asked the 12, do you want to leave too? Simon Peter replied, Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words of eternal life. We believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. And that's what I said. I was like, listen, I got nowhere else to go. What am I going to become? Now, let me make it clear. I was in a state of panic at this point. But I was like, I can't let this go. There's too much wrapped up in this, right? But this is where being in Los Angeles did allow me to ask a different question. And let me explain that. First of all, I have no doubt that many people will probably not even listen to this story. In fact, I've seen it on Twitter. I've already seen people say, I don't want to listen to their personal stories because I don't want to hear somebody talk about leaving, which that hurts me that you don't want to listen to the...
Well, the fear is, Rhett, that they're scared that their kids are going to leave. This is from that same article that I mentioned earlier. Just this past week, we were punched in the gut when our 17-year-old son asked, "Can we sit down and have a conversation?" Gulp, those dreaded words. Rhett and Link have announced they're no longer Christ followers. In their most recent episode of Ear Biscuits, I'm listening to one of them, Ear Biscuits, they walk listeners through their deconstruction of their faith. Our son Warren had questions, lots of questions, concerns, doubts, emotions. Honestly, though, I was secretly thinking to myself, Warren, bro, he calls his son bro, Warren, bro, you've been following Jesus for over 12 years now? How is it that a single 2-hour podcast rocked your world? Like you as a reader, I've heard dozens and even hundreds of stories of people walking away from their faith, so Katie and I checked out this for ourselves. This one was different, the one I'm listening to. After I listened, I was sitting right beside Warren, gut punched. Videos like this, I understand why some Christians might not want to watch it, because it's effective.
The story, I'm just trying to be honest, but I know a lot of people will come to the very, very easy conclusion. Guys, there's nothing surprising about this. You were Christians and then you went to Los Angeles and you lost your faith. It's a story as old as Los Angeles. This isn't surprising. It's like, what's the big deal? This is super simple. But I'm trying to represent that this wasn't something made, this wasn't some flippant decision. This wasn't like, I want to be cool and accepted in modern culture, so I'm going to shed all this stuff.
The reason why it hurts is because
it's a dismissal.
That assumption is a dismissal. It's an assumption of your true motive.
Yeah. I don't know. Christians, when you say things like you just left Christianity because you wanted to live in sin or because it was an emotional decision and so forth. That could be true, but you wouldn't want this said to you about, if you wouldn't want me to say this about you entering Christianity, right? And I have done that, but you don't like it, right? The only reason you're a Christian is because you're weak emotionally and you needed that security, and you weren't really choosing to become a Christian for rational reasons. Christians, you see how that just irks you? Well, it works the other direction. But the truth of the matter is that sometimes those are the real reasons.
That you don't want to state, which are, hey, you just want to sow your wild oats, and you want to be cool, or you want to be able to face your friends who believe different things, or like they have different lifestyles, and in order to be successful out there, you got to make some changes. Okay, I mean, watch any award show now and see how the entertainment industry is pushing change in perspectives and changes in the way people act, if not believe. Mm-hmm. And
I don't like that, by the way. I don't like it when award shows, the people get up there and start preaching.
So it's like, hey, I get it. If you guys want to go out there and you want to pursue your dreams, and if that's really what's most important to you, then yeah, you got to give up your beliefs. You got to make a choice, and it seems like that's the easy thing. You guys made the choice, and
there's a question in the live stream chat from Nathan, who apparently I led to hell. How do you deal with the fear and hate from apologists? So I'm going to make this applicable to Rhett. He probably gets the same thing. A lot of fear, hate from apologists for leading people to hell. As much as possible, I agree with him, Nathan. This is why I tell people I am under the power of Satan leading the youth to hell. Because this is what this version of Christianity that they came from, at least, believe. So you just state what they believe. And they so desperately, they want to argue and be mad at you and say you're wrong. But if you keep just saying stuff that they agree with, it's like, in a way, it makes them even more mad. So it's very entertaining.
Again, it's like no one's said that out loud to us, but
I've seen people say it.
They've typed it maybe.
I've seen it typed. I saw it typed after our first 2 episodes. Somebody was like, what's the big deal? It's clear what happened. They went to Los Angeles and they lost their faith. It happens. And I'm just trying to, first of all, hopefully if you've listened to this point, you at least acknowledge that this was a process that was in many ways independent of where I was at. But also...
Yeah, I don't know what he's going to say. He used the word but. The thing is, if you're surrounding yourself with a bunch of King James Version only people who you like because you have relationships you're friends with, and they're saying the word of God is true, blah, 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 it's really hard to break out of that community. And it's sort of a valid point. If you're in Silicon Valley and everybody's making fun of Christianity, I guess it could go both ways. If you're a contrarian, it could make you even a tougher Christian. But if you like these people who are making fun of Christianity and all the other aspects, you're more likely to kind of laugh as well when Christianity is being teased.
Way more personal and torturous, and it wasn't a calculated business decision. It wasn't like, I don't know, that particular accusation hurts a lot. When people say you were never a Christian, and when people say you changed because of LA, those things hurt a lot because of how untrue I know them to be.
So there's an aspect, and I will get into more of this.
Okay.
So I think we'll come back to it, but your point for now is that there was an aspect of you.
It doesn't hurt me. I don't think it ever really hurt me. It's just annoying. It's just annoying because it's not, you really, really believe that you really believed that Christianity was true at some point in your life, and then you change. And for when people say you were never a true Christian to begin with, that could be you. The Christian who actually says that could be you in 5 years. So if I wasn't a true Christian, maybe you aren't either. You really sure you're a Christian? Really? You're sure? Maybe you're not.
Changing because of LA.
Yeah, and this is where LA comes into play. LA did allow me to ask a new question. And that was, why am I still doing this? And I'll be honest, I would not have asked that question if I was in North Carolina, because when you're in the Bible Belt, you're embedded in Christian culture, there are dozens of reasons why you would still be doing it. I mean, why rock the boat? Why?
Yeah, he's saying what I just said.
Disappoint your parents. Why disappoint your friends? Why get yourself out of this community that you have? I have been going to the same church since I was in 9th grade.
I would say technically your whole life, because that church came from another church that we both went to our whole life.
Exactly. I've been with the same group of believers forever, and now I was leading a Bible study. I had preached sermons on Sunday. You know what I'm saying? There's all kinds of reasons not to leave. Why damage your reputation? Because honestly, in the Bible Belt, this can be, as many people know, if you've left the faith in the Bible Belt, it ain't easy. There's a lot of pressure to stick around and stay in there. But what I realize is that I've been pulling...
Yeah, kudos to anybody who's left Christianity in the Bible Belt. Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Georgia. To stand up and say, hey guys, I'm an atheist. I don't believe God's real. And everybody else is, that type of Christian, the type that I often critique. Wow, good for you.
Pulling on this thread for a really long time.
And hopefully you're safe.
Right? Let's call it the sweater of faith, which is not the armor of God. This is a Rhett McLaughlin concept. The sweater of faith. I've been pulling on this thread, and it had sort of like turned into a vest, and then a midriff, and then a halter top, and now it was a string bikini.
It's not appropriate.
And I was like, I'm going to take the bikini off.
Really not appropriate.
It's just an analogy.
Okay.
And I was in LA.
Yeah.
Men in bikini tops, just, there's lots of places you can
go to the convenience store.
And I took it off, and I call this.
What do you mean? How did you take it off?
Well, I have a journal entry, thankfully.
Right, that's great. Okay, give it to me.
It has nothing to do with bikinis. This is from 2014. Okay. I understand that it is unreasonable to expect Christianity to be a set of scientifically verifiable principles. It is a faith, implying that some sort of believing without seeing is involved. And more specific,
Christians, do you disagree with that? In some sense, it's a type of believing without seeing. Because I think your Lord and Savior said something similar.
Christianity is a relationship with Jesus, and relationships are not well defined or experienced scientifically. However, I don't think it insignificant that the deeper I have dug into Christianity with a thirst for the truth, the more difficult it has become to have faith. In fact, for me, it has become impossible. And that was kind of the reckoning for me, right? That was jumping ship, to use a better analogy than taking off a bikini. You see, I kind of saw Christianity as this boat in a very stormy sea. It's stable. There's a lot of other people on it. It's got a destination. You're going to get through this. It gives you something to hold on to. It gives you stability. It gives you purpose. It gives you direction. And it gives you community. And
yeah. So why not stay a Christian, Rhett? Because you can't force yourself to believe something that you've become convinced is not true. This is where I kind of agree with Jordan Peterson, but kind of not. Jordan Peterson basically says, we got to believe these myths. He doesn't say it this way, but Christianity is a myth, but we got to believe it because it serves a functional, pragmatic purpose, community, common goals, purpose, hope. And without it, a lot of people, not just some people, a lot of people fall into depression, anxiety, need to be watched in order to do the right thing. I'm describing a lot of apologists right now.
And when I jumped ship, I didn't jump to another boat. I jumped into the water. And I pulled my wife and my children in with me.
Okay, so his wife and kids they're all not Christian anymore? Can someone confirm that? Did I ask that already?
I jumped into a sea of uncertainty. And that's where I've lived for about 6 years. And we're going to spend some time talking a little bit more about where we're at now. I do want to talk about it now, but we're getting more detail in like a subsequent podcast, maybe in a Q&A or something. But I want to kind of talk about what this has been like without getting into too much detail. And I know because we're already pretty long. This is going to be a long one. Right after I jumped ship, I kind of went through a period of anger. I was very mad at the Christian leaders and thinkers who I felt deceived by. I want to be very clear about this. No one that I was in personal contact with, pastors, Christian friends, elders in my church, none of them disappointed me or let me down. I did not have a personal tragedy. A lot of people have a traumatic spiritual experience in a church. I didn't. I only got good things from the church. We talked about this a while back that listen, I'm a straight white dude.
Yeah, I have a feeling a lot of Christians are not going to believe Rhett here. You only had great things from the church? Come on, these are humans. Someone must have hurt you.
Dude, you get a lot of things handed to you, especially within the church, if you fit that profile. In some churches, being a straight dude is the only way that you can teach. There's plenty of churches right now, churches in Los Angeles, that people would consider progressive, where you better not tell them you're gay. And if you're a woman, you probably won't be able to preach.
Is he wrong here? Is Rhett wrong? I don't think so. If you're a homosexual or a woman, the probability of you getting to preach, teach, run a church is way low in Christianity, in the United States at least.
It's 2020, and this is still the case. Just want to be clear about that. But for me, I got so much out of this. I was riding high. I could have ridden this train to the top, man. You know what I'm saying? And nobody disappointed me personally, but I was angry at the thinkers. I was angry at the people who had written the book saying that evolution didn't have any evidence. I was angry at the people who had written systematic theology books who basically made it seem like this was all pretty simple. And the pendulum swung for a time into atheism. I was like, this is all bullshit, and I'm gonna be the enemy of this stuff. I'm gonna be an anti-evangelist. That's what I was thinking at the time. Of course, we're still very private about all this, so it wasn't like I said this to anybody publicly. And that anger actually subsided rather quickly. It's interesting. I kind of had my moment of anger.
Yeah, I think everybody goes through this stage. I don't think I got angry for too long, but I did get that sense of why are my leaders, pastors, preachers so stupid? Like they don't have to believe this, but they didn't even teach the opposite side, against all the positions against what we believe in church. Why am I hearing this just now? I remember thinking those thoughts, but yeah.
And atheism. And then that was...
That's the first time he's brought up the word atheism.
And atheism. And then that was replaced with kind of an openness and a curiosity. It's interesting how liberating this one aspect has been. I think the biggest change that has happened to me in my life is that I've lost my appetite for certainty, specifically certainty about things I don't think you can be certain about.
Well, that's interesting. I lost my appetite for certainty. Does that mean he did have an appetite for certainty in the past? I guess so. So you can change in how you view certainty. And the more certainty you desire, maybe the more likely you are to leave Christianity.
I think Christianity, my struggle with Christianity, for me, a big part of it was I had to keep aligning my thoughts and being certain and kind of redriving my faith and why this was reasonable and being sure about this and knowing exactly what was going to happen when I die and all this stuff. But when I was like, I don't think I can be certain about these things. It's like when a person, I've heard this happens, I haven't done it yet. When you stop eating meat, you lose your appetite for meat, a lot of people say.
That's true.
I stopped being certain about things. I lost my appetite to be certain. I didn't wake up with a sense of panic. I thought there would be panic. I thought there would be chaos.
Especially for someone who that's how you lived your life.
And I thought there would be fear.
You were so attached to it.
Right.
Yeah, you know what? He thought, I guess he didn't fear hell when he left, and I didn't either. It's like you're so convinced that hell or separation from God is not real. I mean, even if there is a God, it's not a bad thing to be separated from it because, look, don't believe it now. I'm separated now, and I'm okay. What's the worst that could happen? So, but I know there's still a lot of former Christians and even former Muslims, I'm sure, who still have that fear of hell.
But it's been the most liberating thing that has happened in my adult life. I'm not kidding. I'm not trying to paint that. Listen, it's not like I'm about to give you some philosophy that I live according to now that gives me community, purpose, and meaning. I don't have that. Okay. I think there's a giant sort of shift that's happening culturally, and I think that we may be arriving at that sometime. But it doesn't exist right now for me. But what does exist is an openness, is this curiosity. Listen, I still think that belief in God is very reasonable. I think that the idea that the universe is ultimately purposeful, it's headed towards some ultimate purpose, not only is that comforting, but it kind of feels, again, it feels right to me when I just look at the history of the world and where, but.
Franklin, you make a good point. He was describing that liberating feeling. So there are carrots to leaving Christianity. The cognitive dissonance, in my opinion, is the lowest among all worldviews, if you consider being agnostic or atheist as a worldview. It's the lowest when you're basically saying, hey, could be true. I'm not convinced it is. I doubt it. I'm going to live my life. I'm okay with the uncertainty. I think the cognitive dissonance in that way of looking at the world is minimum compared to religions. And so that's a huge carrot, right? It's like, oh, well, I'm happier. I'm more content with my life. But there's also carrots in Christianity, and he's going through them right here.
The history of the world and where, but I don't know it to be certain, and I don't know anything about this source or this God that might be behind all this, and I'm kind of beginning to think that I don't know if you are supposed to know a whole lot about it. So I would call myself a hopeful agnostic, meaning I don't know, but I hope. I hope there's something. The question that I've gotten.
Hey, Rhett, it's okay to call yourself an atheist. This is the part that I had watched a clip of because I did a Control F find on the word atheist. If what you mean by atheist is you don't believe, you just don't believe in any gods, it's okay to tell your audience, hey, I'm an atheist, and guess what? I'm a okay dude who loves his wife, loves his children, is a good friend, cares about the world, cares about others, and I am an atheist. It's like those Mormon commercials, they have this professional and talks about their life, and then at the very end, and by the way, I'm a Mormon.
From some people who are close to me and love me, is what do you think happens after you die? I don't know. I'm reasonably certain that you don't burn in hell because you were intellectually curious and honest, to put it bluntly. But honestly, I'm more interested now in what happens while I live. It's not so much what happens after you die, but what happens while you're alive.
Life is but a vapor. Christianity is a religion about the afterlife mostly. Now, Jesus did say, I've come to give you life and give you life to the fullest. But still, we're here, we're gone. Whereas now his worldview went from that to, I'm now going to focus on the present, this world.
And I'm trying to answer that question, but it's one of the reasons I'm in therapy. It's honestly one of the reasons that
I never, maybe I'm weird, but I never felt the need for therapy when I left Christianity about, 10 years ago? I was a deist. Yeah, I was around 40. But I never felt like my life's falling apart, I need therapy. But I do understand that for a lot of people who leave Christianity and religion in general, if that was part of their identity, Christianity is a religion where it is a part of your identity because Christ lives in you. So when you tear that, you tear a bit of your psychology, and probably do need professional help.
I get up every morning and do 20 minutes of back exercises, honestly. It's one of the reasons that I think more about what I eat, because the only thing I know that I've got is this life, But the other thing that has kind of happened, because people ask me about, your marriage, your kids, we'll get into this in more detail, but Jessie has her own story. There's been a lot of crying, but she's in a similar place now. And
okay, yeah. So I asked this question earlier: is his wife a non-Christian? But it sounds like she is.
This process, because we were this whole process ruins a lot of marriages. I've seen it a lot. Because sometimes people are like, I can't go there. I'm not going there. It's over. This was the whole foundation. I mean, yeah, we made vows. If you read, we wrote.
Yeah, that's so curious to me why it ruins marriages. Part of me understands it. But from the Christian perspective, if you're a Christian woman, there's nothing in the Bible that says you should divorce your husband just because he left Christianity. In fact, you'd be sinning if you do. And if you're an atheistic man who used to be a Christian, why would you leave your wife over this? I understand some of the deepest things you talk about are now kind of changed, but especially if you have kids together.
Wrote our own vows for our wedding, and they were very much about
Jesus.
But now it's kind of like our marriage has hit a second wind, where it's not so much about a structure that we both sort of assent to that tells us what our marriage should be like. But it's like, hey, it's pretty cool that I get to go through life with you. I love you. And that has actually been pretty.
Yeah, even if, I'm glad they have a second wind, but even if you have spouses separate in terms of God and what they believe about God or don't believe, they still have so many life experiences that you just don't throw away just because someone left Christianity. Like, I don't understand that. And I have heard and hear people go through that. It's like, you, even for selfish reasons, you will be more satisfied, I think, keeping your family together than tearing it apart. But I guess some people just fight. Me and my wife, we never fight. Like, we don't yell at each other or anything like that. So, but I guess some people actually fight about this stuff.
Good thing to concentrate on. And with the kids, I think for me, the idea that purpose and meaning and sort of like orienting your life in a certain way all came from the Bible and from church. Because none of that went away. You know what I'm saying? Like I still want to be the same kind of person that I've always wanted to be. I want to be the same kind of husband. I want the best for my kids.
Meaning like your morality?
Yeah.
Still like you don't, the moment that you jumped ship, you didn't start looking to cheat on your wife.
Right.
Sort of, as an example.
Exactly. It wasn't like all of a sudden, and I'd always been told that. And I had many Christians who I respected said, man, if God wasn't real, I would be out doing drugs right now. Or I'd be out sleeping with whoever I want. And I'm like, I don't actually think you would. I think you actually have an innate desire to be a pretty good person and to live a life that is good for you and the people you love. And a lot of people will attach it to a structure and an explanation like Christianity. But I think very few people actually find the purpose in their faith. I think they have purpose and then they bolster it with faith. That's my personal opinion.
Or even another way to put it, using the marriage example. Do you think that your motive to be true to Jessie was not just out of love for her, but out of love for God, out of respect for, so now you being true to Jessie is out of love for her. It's aligned.
Yeah, and it's not.
That's a good question. He's asking, did you love your spouse just because God told you to, or did you love your spouse for who your spouse is?
It's not a fear of God. It's a love for her, and it's a fear of, listen, there's a lot of shit that happens when you do stuff like that in your life. There are natural built-in consequences to doing the things that are traditionally considered to be sinful, according to every religious tradition. It's not like you just, if I didn't have this, I'd be out doing all kinds of crazy shit. No, you wouldn't. It's like, first of all, my best friends now are not Christians, but they're faithful to their families and
they're not horrible.
Yeah, this is why playing the example game. You know how Christians often say, we need to demonstrate the love of Christ. And if we were to do that effectively, people would see Christ shine through us and they would be more likely to become Christians. That could be true in some cases, but I think it's false in most because of what this guy is saying, what Rhett's saying. Christians are seeing people who are not Christian who behave better than they do to their fellow humans. And they're ashamed sometimes of how much better they treat their fellow humans than they themselves do. And they're asking the question, I thought I had the Holy Spirit to help me through these things and be better than who I am. And yet I still keep making these mistakes over and over again.
They're not horrible people.
And I think that's what we thought was without the Holy Spirit indwelling you, you're just going off the flesh, so to speak. You're going off of your own desires, and that's the only thing keeping you from being a horrible person. I think that's from a young age. I think that's what we felt. But I think the thing
that's a particular view of people that we had in our particular Reformed, Calvinistic. Mm-hmm. Everyone.
Shannon Q, I have no idea what you're saying.
It's totally depraved, and anything good that is coming from anybody is either because of they're created in the image of God or they have a relationship with God.
I think too. I want to get back to that being a subsection and everything that you've talked about, being applied to the whole of Christianity or faith or anything like that. But before that, you were talking about, you were moving to the kids from your relationship with Jesse. I kind of went back to the relationship with Jesse. So when you were talking about the kids, you were talking about raising them in a way to be whole people, to be good people. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you were getting it.
Well, I think the biggest thing about kids is what I have sort of observed in being very much embedded in the church for a very long time, is there's kind of this idea that it is your responsibility as parents to make sure your kids turn out all right, and that it's up to you. You better teach them the right thing. If you don't, they're going to be screwed up. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't teach your kids good things, but what I've observed is that, you know what, my kids actually teach me a lot. I think that kids orient themselves in the world much more readily based on your behavior than the specific things that you tell them. I don't think that having an information session with your kids, indoctrinating them, is what's going to make them into a good person. I'm not saying we're not constantly talking about issues of morality and ethical things, philosophical things, and we talk about that at every time. Our family is like very much always talking about these things. But the interesting and sort of freeing thing is that when my kids have a question about God or the deeper purpose of the universe or what happens when you die, we explore those things as people. I'm not here as some authority that's going to point you to this ironclad thing and that's going to make it okay, because you know what? It's not going to make it okay. Just because
I can tell there's a huge generational gap between me and him when he's talking about his kids. He was saying did he say his kids teach him more? His kids teach him more than he teaches them, or something like that. I forget exactly how he worded it, and I don't want to rewind it, but nope. There's a huge difference between a 50-year-old and a 40-year-old, and even a bigger difference between a 40-year-old and a 30-year-old, and a tremendous big difference between a 30-year-old and a 20-year-old. And I tell you, just life experiences make so much difference. Your kids know nothing compared to their parents. Nothing. I'm using some hyperbole here, but I do get his point about that. I think because of evolution, it's the kids that give a lot of meaning and purpose in people's lives, parents' lives. It's like we're programmed to procreate, and by not procreating, we're going against our programming.
I can point to this book and tell you that you should believe this. I am proof that believing those things isn't necessarily going to make all those deeper thoughts go away. And so in getting my kids comfortable with sort of living in tension and being okay with not having all that stuff figured out. But it's like, but what can you have figured out? And what does lead to a fruitful, meaningful life? Well, you know what? A life devoted to others. A life devoted to yourself.
Yeah, this is the meaning of life. In fact, my wife printed this out the other day. Quote from Albert Schweitzer: "The purpose of human life is to serve and to show compassion and the will to help others." And this is basically for the people who say, where do you get your purpose, your meaning? What's the purpose of life if there is no God, if you don't believe in a God? Well, this is what Rhett's saying, and I think he's echoing Albert Schweitzer.
Is going to fail. I can't explain, I don't feel like I have to explain the dynamics behind that for it to be true. And so.
But you do explain it. Sometimes you talk about being a parent as if like, just you are who you're going to be, and I know that's not what you're saying, but I think what you just said is clarifying that you're teaching.
Well, I am saying that to an extent.
I know you are. And
I am saying that to an extent.
We have a little bit of a different
approach,
approach, but
I would say that the latest child psychology basically suggests that kids are they're going to be a certain way. But
you're talking about selfishness versus self-sacrifice. You're talking about what it means to love. You're talking about what type of person do you want to be?
Yeah, and also the thing I try to get my kids to do is process the consequences of their actions. It's just like, hey, Shepherd, I just asked you if you had mom's phone, and you told me no, but you do have mom's phone. Let's talk about why you did that, and let's talk about what it means to be a person who's willing to lie, who's willing to say something that's false about this, and so it's like, what is going to happen if you become a person who can't be trusted? What's that going to do? What kind of life are you going to live as a person who can't be trusted? And for me, that just is that tangible, like nitty gritty, getting down to the details of like, what does this mean? What are the ramifications of your behavior? For me, and listen, I know that I've read all the Ravi Zacharias books and I've seen him speak. I know that the whole idea is, well, where's the morality come from if it's not coming from a moral lawgiver, God himself? I think that argument is marginally compelling, but I don't think that it's conclusive. And I think the point is I don't think you wake up and make decisions to be a good person because you've got this moral lawgiver. There may be a moral lawgiver. I'm not saying that God doesn't exist, but I think that it's a much more natural and organic process than there's a book, I read it, and now I know what to do. I think that's why those core qualities of what makes a human good exist in cultures everywhere.
That's not a bad way of rebutting guys like Ravi Zacharias. Like, if there's a moral law, there has to be a moral lawgiver. You could just say, no, that doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be a moral lawgiver, just like there doesn't have to be a good gravity giver. It could just be a property of the universe, or it could be socio, environmental, whatever, intuitions. But he's saying, yeah, it could be, but I don't see why it's necessary or it has to be.
Find a culture in the middle of the Amazon that's never been exposed to the gospel or any sort of religious system outside of what they believe. Are they going to think that murdering is great? Probably not. They didn't need Hammurabi or Moses to tell them that. So,
but I guess I'll move on to one other thing.
Whatever his name is, I don't think that's how you say his name.
Hammurabi's code. I don't know how you say his name. I was curious. Personal question: when it comes to therapy, does anything come up? I know you talked about anger, and you also talked about how there wasn't an inciting incident outside of your own intellectual exercise and research. But do you find that there's baggage, that there's things that you need, things that you need to heal from? Maybe or now that your perspective is shifted, is there any of that?
Again, and I kind of feel like an asshole for saying this because I know that so many people, so many women, and so many people who don't fit the mold. And we talked about like the LGBTQ plus experience of people in the church. There's a lot of stories of trauma because as people were sort of developing their identity and self-actualizing, they were doing it in an oppressive environment, and that's damaging. But again, because of who I am and what I look like, I pretty much just benefited. And so I don't look back at my experience with the church in a traumatic way. I just feel like, oh man, I was very lucky, and I actually.
But Rhett, you did admit earlier that that you felt angry and hurt for being lied to. That has to be some baggage that lasts a while.
We talked about it last week. Professionally, I got a lot out of it. I was able to develop professionally and live my dream out. For me, most of my therapy is related to, just sort of the realization that everyone's personality is essentially constructed over their child, their inner child. And it's a way of sort of navigating and moving through the world. It's a protective shell. And so for me, it's like, why is that your shell? And what is that child underneath saying, feeling?
Do you feel
it's more early childhood stuff, and it's not trauma, it's just figuring out.
But do you feel like everything that you, having constructed that shell, that the belief system that you had became a part of that, became another layer?
I haven't processed it, but definitely yes. I haven't gotten to any of this in my therapy yet.
They're talking about way too much psychology for me. This is getting boring.
Is very much in your head,
Yeah.
And apparently I'm the psychologizer, and I'm bored.
So maybe there's stuff under there.
And I understand that's one of the reasons that a lot of people won't relate to what I'm saying, because they're like, why is this? There's Christians that I know and love who, when I tell them this story, I just kind of see them just look off and quit listening. Because it's just like, why is he spending all this time talking about the second chromosome?
Right.
Like, why is that important to him? And what does that have to do with God?
Yeah.
And for me, it has everything to do with my story, because it's all related,
Second chromosome, he's talking about evidence for evolution.
Again, the whole idea is that the foundation is truth. And so, but in terms of, I feel like my attempts to like focus on the relationship and focus on faith was my attempt to get out of my own head and get into my heart when it came to my perspective on God, and to lean into the relationship. But again, it's that inextricable relationship between facts and feelings. It's still, you can have an incredible experience with somebody relationally, and it can feel completely emotional and physical, but yet there is sort of a scientific representation, a naturalist understanding of what's happening between the two of you. And I think that there's this foundation that I kept coming back to, and every time I came back to it. And the interesting thing is, it isn't like the Christian apologists are saying, that they don't make the argument that I was trying to make in my head. They don't say, don't worry about this, just have faith. They say, because they know they have to, no, this is defensible. Here's why. Here's why evolution didn't happen. And here's why you can trust, and I can even prove to you. I know a guy who wrote a term paper in college on why the resurrection is an undeniable historical fact. Those things being true are sort of what the founding fathers of the faith, especially those guys in the early church who were like figuring out how to think about all this stuff. They were doing intellectual work. It wasn't just happening in the heart. They were laying a philosophical framework that we've built our faith.
Hey, welcome, Hakenar.
And I think that we've got more access to information about that process than we've ever had. And it deserves some scrutiny. And I actually think it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. That's my personal opinion. I could be wrong. But
the internet, where religion comes to die.
That's where I'm at.
So, two things. I want to come back. I want to end on like your label that you apply to yourself, but I did want to ask, how do you process the anticipated criticism of everything you shared?
I don't know. I know I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, and one of the characteristics of a 3, which is an achiever, is you want to be liked by everybody.
Big mistake. You don't want to be liked by everybody.
And being misunderstood or misrepresented is
people who want to be liked by a lot of this is my guess. This is flat out guess. People who have a desire to be liked by a lot of people are more likely to need therapy.
A direct assault on my ego, and I know that that's going to happen. But it's just part of the growth process. Being okay with it. Being okay with people mischaracterizing the things that I've said.
Yeah, being okay with people mischaracterizing. I tell this to Christians to try to help them psychologically to have your default position that you will be misrepresented, you will be misunderstood, you will be strawmanned. Atheists, same thing, who've left Christianity. People will say you left Christianity for emotional reasons. People will say that you just want to live in your sin. Just accept it. My best advice to my own kids and people is assume that not everyone's going to love you, and assume some people are going to hate you, and learn to be okay with that, with people actually hating you, and say, oh, that person hates me. Okay, why? Okay, I disagree with that reason. Move on. It's really tough, though, I understand.
People dismissing the things that I said. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people who say that, oh, well, it's clear he was never a Christian. He had an intellectual understanding, but he was never in a relationship with Jesus because he couldn't have been. It's not consistent with my theology.
It threatens them. It's like, if you really did have a personal relationship with Jesus at some point in your life, and now you don't, man, that threatens the people who currently do. It's like, well, that could happen to me.
That's again, like I said, that's tough. But I think it's only tough because I'm an egotistical asshole sometimes. I think if I'm truly humble,
Dark, and I'm not disparaging therapy at all.
Then I shouldn't let those things bother me. It's just like, yeah, that's going to happen. But I don't know how I'm going to process it. I've seen that you've engaged a little bit with people on Twitter, and for some reason I just haven't had the emotional energy. I've been thinking a lot about this story. Yeah. I think I will engage with people if they have questions. I think we will engage with people if they have questions. And after you tell your story, which I'm excited to hear your story because, you're so different than me.
Yeah.
And I think
especially for this type of stuff and this experience.
And I think,
but it's very much intertwined. And I think it's, we made a decision for you to go first, and I think that's very helpful for me, for people to understand my story second.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know how. I'm definitely, because I want everybody to like me, which is a flaw. It's not something I'm proud of. I know that some people won't like this. A lot of people won't like this. A lot of people are going to be offended. A lot of people are going to say that I misrepresented the facts. A lot of people are going to say, because listen, if you agree,
it's always going to be the case. It's okay to offend people. In fact, I'm starting to think we need to have YouTube channels that's all that happens is it's people offend other people on purpose to get them to be stronger. It's like, I really do think that you can condition yourself to be more immune to offense. It's like, there's still a big percentage of the population that I think this would benefit. Where try to figure out what really triggers you and just sit and then be bombarded with it. Start out slow, and then every week you condition yourself, just like a runner would, to handle the pain of running. Now, but a lot of people say, "Oh, that's torture, Doug. You're mean. You're evil, spirited for saying stuff like that." But if you want to, the world's an unfair place, and it will always be unfair. And this is a good way to get you stronger. It's the same like with exercising. Because now you're exercising your emotions, your brain.
With everything I said, then how could you still have faith? So it's like, I understand that. Listen, I remember we had a good friend. We had a good friend who had a bunch of doubts, and I remember how we treated him. And I loved him, but I remember when he started talking all this stuff about how he was doubting certain things, I was like, I remember asking him, I was like, what are you going to teach your kids, man?
I do. I remember that now.
Yeah, appeal to consequences, which I'm not against the consequences. I'm a consequentialist, but for the Christian to say, well, if you leave Christianity, what are you going to teach your kids? It's like, well, that's a good question, but all you need to do is just think about it a little bit more and see how other people do it.
And I remember thinking things like, man, I guess he never knew Jesus, because the Jesus I know, I would never think those things. And I know how I would have processed hearing this story. And it's just,
as a side note,
it's difficult for me.
I'm glad that we still have a relationship with him, and that we've talked through it since then, and that he was patient with us in a way that now you're asking for people to be patient with you, and I'm asking for people to be patient with me.
Yeah.
Patient not in waiting for someone to change their mind, but just to still be loving. He was still very loving to us, even though it had to have been written all over everything we said and our faces,
Yeah, for sure. We should wrap things up.
Okay, so I think my last, in a desire to put a bow
Rhett wants out of there
on something, are you happy with the label that you've given yourself of hopeful agnostic? I mean, are you happy with that?
Are you happy with that? I think what's his name, Blink, is really asking, well, why are you being weak here? Why don't you just call yourself an atheist?
I don't know how to answer. I'm happy with it.
I mean,
it's just where I'm at. I am happy. I am happy.
Is it a destination? I guess is.
For me, I am open to revelation from God. Like I haven't. It's like, listen, there's some things.
Should I step back?
There's some things that I don't think I'll ever believe again. Like I'm not ever going to believe that the Earth is 10,000 years old. Like.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's really hard to believe that Santa Claus is real when you've gone into your parents' bedroom, opened the closet, and saw the presents. It's like you can't go back from that. That car left the garage a long time ago. I don't think I can have a worldview that doesn't embrace the reality of evolution. That every living being on the earth is related to every living being on the earth. And I actually think that's beautiful, even from the perspective of there might be a creator. And I know that I could go into the desert, or I could go into the office and have a crazy religious experience that all of a sudden I come back and I'm like, I got something for you. And I'm not closing myself off to that. I'm not some. That's a great question, Nico. He says he's a hopeful agnostic. What are you hoping for, Rhett? I think that answer might be different depending on the person.
Pure naturalist. Because listen, if my story represents anything, it's that I'm willing to change my mind. I had a faith that was so solid.
I'm willing to change my mind. How many? I remember. I seem to remember. This is the question that I got blocked on with capturing Christianity. That's the last thing I remember. Anyhow, I said, "Look, Christianity could be true. Some version of it could be true. I could be wrong. I could change my mind, become a Christian. Can you say that?" I asked a forget what his name was, one of the moderators there. I asked that of Cameron Bertuzzi as well. Can you say that publicly? I just said it publicly. Can you do that? Can you say Christianity might be wrong? I might change my mind. I might be convinced someday that it's not true. And it could definitely just not be true. Can you say that, Christian apologist? It's so difficult.
This was so deep. This wasn't this Sunday morning thing, man. This was a lifestyle. This was in my blood. And I let it go because I did not believe it to be true.
Franklin, you make another great point. It sounds like he isn't willing to change his mind about evolution. Yeah, I agree. It does sound like that. But I'll change my mind on evolution in an instant if we find a bunny rabbit bones in the Precambrian layer. How's that? Yeah, it's just gone. Doesn't matter to me if evolution goes away in a heartbeat.
I'm going to follow truth wherever it leads, without fear of uncomfortable conclusions. And if that means that, oh, and you know what? You're going to have an encounter with God that is going to send you to some new place or send you all the way back, then so be it. But the thing I don't want to do is I feel like the curiosity and the openness that characterizes my life right now is something I don't want to let go of. And I don't want to be, in fact, a quote from Ravi Zacharias that I used to say, I'm going to butcher the quote, but he essentially talked about, you don't want to be so open-minded that your mind is like a sewer, just letting everything in. Eventually you got to bite down on something. So I recognize that you just can't be passive, but actually, I don't know. I have had some experiences and come to some conclusions, but I'm not ready to share all that at this point. But I would say that if anything, it's just sort of confirmed the direction that I've been going, kind of away from the faith of my childhood. That's my story.
That's a story. So what's my general thoughts on this? My thoughts is that every person has their own experiences, their own journey. What convinces them might be different compared to another person. But when you put yourself in situations where you respect and love other people who think differently than you, you're more likely to be open to what they're saying. And that leads to researching things that you wouldn't normally research or talk about things you wouldn't normally talk about, which leads to maybe changing your mind and being open to change your mind on certain things. This is why the internet's so dangerous. This is why the internet's so dangerous for having people believe the earth is flat. But it's also dangerous for Christians because they're more likely to watch people like Rhett and say, that I resonate with that. And I don't need to believe in this God anymore, especially this version of God, the version that Rhett used to believe in. But there's no good reason to believe in any version of a God, is there? First cause, right? First cause. The internet is a safe place for atheists. Is it? I don't know, with the apologetics empire on the move on YouTube, I feel very threatened. Okay, now I'll take some questions if anybody has some. There was a whole bunch I couldn't answer because I was doing a show. Am I the only guy who really wasn't aware of Ear Biscuit before? Sequel video for Link's story soon? I don't know. To be honest, Reed, I was a little bit bored at the end there. I really liked the first part. Maybe I should have started at the very beginning. Can I share my thoughts on therapy? Some people need it, and sometimes it's very effective. Sometimes it's not effective. Sometimes people don't need it. That's my theory on therapy. Depends on what type of therapy. Is it from a King James Version only therapist? Is it from a degreed therapist? It's so interesting that I say something and people say, why are you against therapy? This is why you should always assume people will misunderstand you. Twice Baked. I love Rhett and Link. Been following them for years. No, Nathan, I would not take a bunch of magic mushrooms. At least not today. No need. Just like I have no need of Christianity, I have no need of mushrooms. I can get high on life without it. Hi, Mr. PineCreek. You look very bald on that YouTube avatar. What YouTube avatar? Oh, my hair's blonder there, maybe. I'm just as bald now as back then. Oh, we're more bald. Snow in Montreal, Canada. Well, welcome, Mrs. Toot from Canada. What would cause you to question your atheism without being convinced in the belief of a dog? 1 Kings 18. This is so simple. It's like Christians, all you have to do is 1 Kings 18. But they can't. Can I be the Gordon Ramsay of Christianity? No, I don't think so. I have no need of a religious experience, Nathan. I do not. There's nothing in my being that desires it. Why isn't it okay to be an agnostic? It is okay to be an agnostic. I'm an agnostic. I'm also an atheist. I'm also a man. Is it legal to be proud? No, never mind. If a new religion appeared whose clergy could reliably perform miracles, would you convert? I tell you, William, that's a great question. Great question. My confidence in what they are doing would go up, and what they are representing would go up. I have to be honest. Stop the music. It's a great question. It's one that I think some atheists struggle with. Like, oh, this is so stupid. Why would you believe this if they can? But seriously, think about it. Think about a person who reliably can. You can write down a 20-digit number and seal it in an envelope, and this person can recite it over and over. I mean, every 20-digit number they can get perfectly for every time, thousands of times in a row from different people who just random number generator or whatever, they make up numbers. And you're thinking, okay, whoa, something's going on here. What is it? Maybe it's completely naturalistic. Maybe there's some type of spiritual thing. Maybe it's radio waves. And so then you start testing it, and it's not that, it's not that. It's like, but this person claims, the reason why I can tell you these 20-digit numbers, no matter where you are in the world, as long as you start thinking them and write it down, I can tell you, is because there's a God named Poopy Face, and the Poopy Face God is giving me this information. It's like, well, what if he's right? Poopy Face God is real. There's pretty good evidence that something's happening here. Poopy Face, where did I come up with that? Well, Daniel Negrano and I are both Canadian. All Canadians look alike. How do you gracefully handle criticism of your lack of belief from family members? Oh, so that's worth stopping the music. How do you gracefully handle criticism of your lack of belief from family members? Asked Mrs. Apostate. Well, key number one, if you are a former Christian and left Christianity and all your family is still Christian, step number one, live at least 2,000 miles away from your immediate family. That's step number 1. Step number 2, when you do visit family or they visit you, just avoid the conversation. So live far away, avoid the conversation. Step 3, if the conversation cannot be avoided, you say nothing other than ask simple questions, short sentences. And if someone asks you something, if let's say dad asks you a question, you answer very short. You answer incompletely on purpose and force them to ask a follow-up question. And if they assume things, let them. If they think the worst of you, let them. In other words, let yourself be punched, figuratively. But model the behavior you desire. So if you desire them to be sincere with their questions, then you be sincere with your questions. If you want them to not just preach to you, don't preach to them. Keep your answers short. And think the best of them, even though they might not think the best of you. In other words, whatever your natural instinct to do the reverse. Because in most cases, the natural instinct is to lash back. Okay, start the music. This is what Christians really fear will happen to their children. Yes, but why is that fear there? Grayback, no, I will not make a video about Cameron and Linda McGrew. It's just far too boring. Please have a chat with legendary apostate prophet. Oh, Brandon Ho. Yes. I was going to do a video on apostate prophet with David Wood, but so many people just can't stand David Wood. But I could tell what was going through the mind of, what's his first name? Apostate prophet, what's his first name? I could just see what was going inside his mind when David was talking. Because the more knowledgeable you are in refuting Mormonism or Islam, the more likely you're going to apply some of those same things to your own belief system. Unless you're really stupid. Which, I don't think David Wood's stupid. I don't remember that, Franklin. I have to go back and watch that. She said that the young Earth creationists did plant a rabbit fossil in the Precambrian layer. How come I don't remember that? I gotta go see that. But yeah, I had Mary Schweitzer on my show a long time ago. I think it was like 2 years, 3 years. Yeah, I know Mrs. Apostate that he's your hubby. Tell him he's invited to come on my show, or I'll come on his, or both. Because, in fact, I think he's going to debate David Wood at some point. I have a lot of ideas for him. Well, I think he already knows it, but just take clips of David Wood saying stuff and apply it to Christianity. Paita Panner. This is not your first live stream here. I think I remember you. Or maybe it was just in the comments. I'm literally just in time for the finishing music. No, that's not true, Peter Penner. The music stopped. You're in Australia? I really enjoy it. You really are in Australia? Because you know what? When your name, Peter, Well, I'm not sure how to pronounce it now, because I thought this was a riff, or not a sarcastic comment on Mennonites. But maybe it has nothing to do with Mennonites. But this is how Mennonites would say Peter Penner. It would be Peter Penner. And that's, anyhow. Pinar. Oh, to answer what's his name's question, who asked it over and over and over again. What's his name? Jojo? I think he's the same guy from Blab Days. I think he's Hindu or something. But Christians at age 7 started doubting, mid-30s. Deists by 40. Atheists by 40 and a half. Franklin, I think I know your position on evolution, that you believe that it's false. But if history is any indicator, you are at high risk of leaving Christianity. Did you know that? Based on statistics? Hey, Julia West. I was waiting for you. Now I can end the show because you finally made it. Just kidding. If parents talk about how disappointing Rhett and Link are in Ear Biscuits, just ask them why. What's the big deal? What's the worst that could happen? Make them, force them, articulate why leaving Christianity is bad. Who would win a debate? Theistic fundamentalist Doug or agnostic atheist Doug? No brainer. Agnostic atheist Doug. Oh, by the way, my last video with that short clip I made of Inspiring Philosophy, he got upset about that because it really made him look bad, I guess. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's like a minute and a half long. Poof! My apologies to Rhett and Link. They were scheduled to come on. Seriously, they were going to come on today, but we ran out of time. Have a great, great day, guys.